Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe is such a special film, and I'm here with Donna Lisa to discuss the fashion. So, what inspired you when styling the costumes for this movie?
In terms of inspiration, I worked very closely with Aitch, of course, to determine the look and feel of the film. In terms of color, aesthetic, everything, me and Aitch worked really closely to hone in on like who these boys were and how we wanted that story to play out via their costumes. Um, we took inspiration from movies like Stand By Me, was a big one that I personally adored. Yeah, we just wanted it to feel very organic and very natural and not play into the natural tropes of the 80s.
Can you tell me a little bit more about H and your collaboration process?
Yeah, absolutely. So Aitch, I could start with how we met. Ironically, she went to high school with my husband. And then, how Instagram works these days, my husband just shared my work and she caught wind of me there and we connected and she approached me with the film um, for Ari and Dante. And once I read the script, I was absolutely blown away and immediately had, my view on the boys. And honestly, like me and her vision very much aligned right away. We were always on the same wavelength for the boys. And yeah, in terms of my process, like I obviously read the book and I wanted to be aware of like who these boys were, and how to convey that right via wardrobe. So I did, in terms of research, I obviously referenced a lot of movies that I felt were in line, in terms with costumes that I liked. Like I mentioned, Stand By Me was a big one for me, and H. Um, yeah, and then I go down the rabbit hole of like pulling references online in terms of like what I feel like embodies like each and every character, and I make mood boards for each one, right? And that's basically our how we start our process. And then me and H talk, extensively in terms of like the color palette for each character and how that we're going to progress that, right, for their story arc for each character and how we see each one developing and that translating via wardrobe as well.
You mentioned the 80s being like an inspiration, and where did you source the costumes for the film?
Aristotle and Dante, we sourced from multiple places, but the majority and bulk of our costumes came from a place in Pomona called La Bamba Vintage. And they're very near and dear friends of mine at this point. And they were vital to us being able to pull this off, right? Because Aristotle and Dante was an indie feature, and we faced many of the hurdles that a lot of indie features do in terms of budget. Um, and luckily for us, vintage was exactly what we needed, to get into this like world of the 80s that they were in 80s El Paso, 87. We relied heavily, thank God, on Albert, who owns La Bamba Vintage. Rental houses are very expensive, so we still did some rentals via Western Costumes in Los Angeles. That was very helpful to us, but the bulk of it came from buys from vintage stores, and La Bamba Vintage being the main one that helped us out, which we also even filmed in their location. They were so wonderful.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, I love vintage clothing. I feel like it really, it has its story of its own. And so with the characters, do you feel like the characters' queerness played a role when you were designing their looks?
Absolutely. And particularly for Dante, because as we know, like Aristotle in the book is not he's not as honed into who he is as a person as much as Dante. Dante's character is very much like comfortable in his own skin, and that needed to translate via his wardrobe from the beginning. So the color palettes, the silhouettes, everything with both of the boys were very intentional, and I think it's really clear to see that like Dante is obviously like brighter and bolder and does is takes more risks with fashion than Ari, who's a little bit more reserved, and naturally so, because that reflects of like obviously like what his inner turmoil, right, that he just is not quite sure who he is yet, and that's part of his journey. And Dante is obviously self-discovering as well. I mean, he's very much like they're boys, and this is like a coming of age story. But Dante, it's very apparent that he is way more comfortable in his skin than Dante. I mean, than Ari. So of course, with Dante, we were able to have a lot more fun in terms of fashion and things like that. And Reese Gonzales, who plays Dante, was more than thrilled with that, because he very much embodies who Dante is and was very aligned with a lot of what Dante wore. Like, so yeah, we had a lot of fun with both of the boys. But of course, you know, like I said, Dante was more in the world, like the more colorful world, the more bolder, more fashion forward, naturally, because it made sense for his character. That's kind of like how I approached it. And it's, you know, with actors and with film, it's very collaborative as well. The actors were, you know, played a heavy hand too, and like giving like their opinions and what felt right to them, right? Like as their character and what they felt like, yes, you know, like this is absolutely what Ari would wear, this is absolutely what Dante would wear. Yeah, and we each had, you know, we thought of like little things for each of them. Like, you know, Dante, if you notice in the film, has like an array of sunglasses. That was a choice we made, and that Dante is just obsessed with sunglasses, and he does have a variety of them throughout the film. So little quirks like that we discussed, and they were just intentional choices that we wanted to make in the film.
In your process, you kind of highlighted this, but can you expand on, do you feel like you style the character or the actor? Or obviously it's a mix of both, but if you could kind of speak to that, I would love to hear more.
Sure. You know, I would say that it's definitely both. You know, it's very much about the character, but there, you know, the character and the actor, obviously there has to be synergy there, and they have to very much feel like they are that person. So actors in any kind of role do play a big hand, and I love to collaborate with actors. I think it's very important to help them be able to get into the headspace of that character, and wardrobe is crucial for that. So if they don't feel like they're embodying the character, then like that's going to affect their performance. So the clothes on them have to feel like they're so a part of them that they're just not even conscious of what they're wearing in order to be able to make the, you know, do their performance well. So for me, I feel like it's absolutely both. You know, like as a costumer, as a designer, I always obviously focus on the character, because that, you know, that's my job, and it's a part of, I need to develop the character and translate that story via wardrobe. And it's like, how do you do that? You know, you have to very much think about who this character is and their entire story arc, like where they start and where they end, you know, and that should, you know, of course, like naturally, like through life, like our wardrobe is influenced by how we're feeling inside and where we are in life. So yeah, so those are all thoughts that are discussed heavily, like not only with the actor, but obviously with Aitch, our director, and everyone involved. So like that synergy is extremely important. And we discover that during fitting. So that's like where we play and where we try things out. And I will say for Ari and Dante, it was, I would say, seamless. Like it was just, everything was just very organic. Yes, we used a lot of vintage, which was very helpful. Of course, we had to, you know, for doubles and things like that, we did rely on some contemporary stuff that we had to age and dye and that sort of thing. But I also love vintage for that same reason. I feel like, you know, it already has that lived in like life that we want and that look and feel. So it just played very beautifully in this film.
With vintage, and you mentioned like the storytelling element, is there any story that you want to tell in particular about one of the pieces that you found? I feel like there might be something to tell there.
Oh, there's so many. There's so many good pieces that like the entire crew fought over at the end. I will say there, it's funny, there's one very beautiful silk bomber that never even, it actually ended up getting cut. It was in a scene that got cut from the film, but Aitch now owns that bomber and she loves that, and it's always like a talk because we were like so obsessed with it, and unfortunately it got cut from the film. But like that, there's many things like that that you know, shirt that Dante's wearing in your background, which is like obviously like the cover, that striped shirt we were obsessed with because we literally had to do nothing to it. It was the perfect boxy cut and silhouette that was very of the 80s of the time. So we absolutely loved that. There was a lot of graphic tees that we loved that were like very much of the 80s. Yeah, I'm like, I mean, there was honestly so many pieces that it's kind of hard to pinpoint just one. Of course, Ari has like a Carlos Santana shirt. Originally we found, I mean, it's very similar to the one that you see on screen, but of course, due to like licensing things, we couldn't actually use the real shirt that we found, the Carlos Santana shirt. And it was, I mean, it was beautiful, but sometimes you run into stuff like that. And so you have to do little workarounds. So that shirt was actually one that we ended up customizing. So it's like, you know, we had to do our own artwork and change it up ever so slightly to be able to use the artwork. That was a fun one. And obviously it's a very special shirt and significant within the book. So that was a very special piece that we had to actually work on. But yeah, in terms of the vintage, it was there's like too many to count. I mean, I had like authentic like Converse from the 80s, which I believe Reese went home with that Dante wore. But things like that were just like very iconic. And just, yeah, amazing pieces. I feel like we had so much fun with the wardrobe, and the cast really benefited because they got to keep some of it.
Going into a specific item, can you talk a little bit about Ari's necklace? Because it's something that he constantly wears in the film. So is there a story behind it, or kind of talk about like the intention?
Yes, absolutely. Well, funny enough, that necklace Max wore to our fitting. It's his personal. And
Wow.
right when he walked in with it, I was immediately drawn to it because of not only its significance to him, because it's just something personal of his, given to him by his family, but because I felt like it was so Ari, and obviously me and H felt from the beginning that, you know, these boys really embodied the characters, and I wanted there to be a tie in between Max and Ari, like something that was special to him, but also made so much sense for Ari. So yeah, that's where that necklace came into play, and I immediately, you know, looked at Aitch and was like, this is like the necklace, like he should have this the entire film. And it ended up being that way. And yeah, so it's actually Max's, and he wore it the entire time, and he really never takes it off.
Right.
Yeah, so that was a beautiful piece, and I'm so glad that it made it in the film.
Wow.
It's really interesting because the this is a weird side note, but originally the actor, another actor that was up for the same role as Max to play Ari, who ends up playing Daniel in the film, who's, you know, a kind of side love interest for Dante. He showed up to the audition and he had a very similar necklace on.
Wow.
So if you notice in the film, I also had him keep that on. So if you notice in the film, he has a very similar round necklace, and it's very intentional. We did these things very intentionally, and it's because, you know, like Dante clearly has a type, and they not only really look alike, but they have similar attributes. So it was just all very intentional, but serendipitous at the same time.
How interesting. That's such a great story. My last question was going to be, did you have a favorite outfit from the film? It sounds like there were
Ooh,
many
yeah.
items that you're drawn to.
One of my honestly favorite outfits from the film was Dante when he comes back from Chicago and he has on like a white and like multicolored checkered kind of shirt layered over a graphic tee and some teal suspenders. And we really had fun with that one. He absolutely loved it. He had some like little vintage Ray-Bans on. And and we just like thought that that was iconic and beautiful. I also really love the girls' outfits, like for their party scene. When they're clearly, you know, trying to dress up as women and they're like really like trying to, you know, give it. And we had so much fun, and so did the girls. Like those dresses were very special. The one in particular that Elena wears is like an all leather red dress that I personally have had in my personal kit for years. and it is original from the 80s. And I was praying so hard at the fitting that fit her, and when we got it on, we were just like dying over how good it fit her, and it was just, yeah, beautiful. So those are all pieces to me that stand out greatly.
Well, thank you so much for the chat, Donna Lisa. Please see Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe in theaters this September.